Hi, my name's Ben. This is my brand new heart, and welcome to New Heart Games. So this video is going to be the third in the series where I'm looking at how I go about creating new campaigns and new settings. I've argued from the start that everything is about building a sense of immersion. Every time that your players come to your game, they've already got the buy-in from the moment they walk in through the door. They're excited to join in. They're curious to find out more about the secrets of the game mode that you've created. Now, previously, we've looked at the process of coming up with the concept or the idea for your game world in the first place, and things that we can implement in character creation to make them feel part of the world by tweaking their backgrounds. But today we're actually going to look at the nitty-gritty of what you can put in there that they interact with throughout the game that makes them feel like this is a living and breathing world. And for that, today we're going to be looking at vendors. So before we go any further, I think it's best that we try and dive into what we're trying to do with our players. Now, every player, when they're playing their game, are going to be building their unique mental model. A great example of this would be one of my recurring bad guys, like the big bad guy. And I always describe him as having an iron mask, but just kept his mouth exposed at the bottom. And I always just view this as like a faceless mask with like just an eerie mouth, and he was just somehow had supernatural vision to go around the world. But one of my players, as he said to me when I described this mask at a later date, didn't find it familiar. And I said, well, you find this familiar. And that's because he always envisioned the mask as having a single eye hole. So take into account, no matter what you say, even if you go out of your way to give him in-depth details about the world, your players are going to fundamentally view it differently. That's not a bad thing, because the imagination is incredibly powerful. And that's what we're trying to fire up here. So I think we should take a page out of Dark Souls. I think I've said this more than once. It's because they are really good, these Dark Souls games, Elden Rings and things, really good at giving short, but incredibly powerful descriptions of items and places in the world that create a very powerful mental image. So when we are creating our set of vendors for our game world, I think what's important is that we are going to be putting items in there with just a little bit of flavor text that's going to do this job of creating a powerful short description that's going to help our players build their own mental images that knits their mental model together. And I think there's two ways that we can do this. This is by providing specialist vendors with unique and interesting products. And secondly is adding just a single sentence, maybe two, of flavor text to our items. A final important point before we dive into this. Not every item we need to sell in a shop has to have a purpose or even a point. It can literally just be there for window dressing, just to add that little bit of flavor. And you never know. Never underestimate the creativity of your players or their resourcefulness. Just because you put an abacus in a vendor doesn't mean that one of the players thinks, oh, I really want that, and then somehow uses it to create an ad hoc bomb later on in the game. Because that's what players do, shenanigans. Okay, so first of all, let's look at specialist products. So what you are seeing here is the Bakewell tart, or Bakewell pudding. There's a technical difference there, but it doesn't really matter. What you need to know is that this thing is damn delicious. And it comes from a small town in the north of England, in a place called the Peak District, happened to be known as Bakewell. Supposedly, this was created all by accident, but it quickly became very popular. And nowadays, if you go to this small town of Bakewell, it's full of bakeries everywhere, and each of these bakeries is selling loads and loads of these Bakewell tarts, including the original bakers that started to sell this version of it. And there are queues out the door for people to buy this stuff. I went there on my honeymoon with my fantastic wife. I bought a giant Bakewell tart and ate it all to myself. So what I'm trying to say here is that this little town has created its own cultural gift to the world in the form of the Bakewell tart. And if you think about it, there's so many other towns, so many other regions and countries in the world that produces a unique cultural speciality, be it food or fashion or even music. Every one of these cultural outputs helps describe their world and who they are as people. I think it is very important we put specialist vendors into our game that has something that reflects the world that they are in and sells some of these specialist products, like the Bakewell tarts. So potential vendors that we could have which do express part of the culture of the nation or people that our players currently find themselves could be potentially instrument maker, food and drink. Think about how often food or drink expresses that culture, even alcohol. Could be a toy maker, could be an engineer or a tinker if you've got like more of a steampunk setting. It could be any number of smithies. Think about how unique cultures make unique weapons. If you look from the Middle East, they make the scimitar, which is the signature curved blade, whereas the katana comes from Japan, which was specifically made because the whole region was strapped for iron. Let's have a look at an example of what I'm trying to talk about here. This is a meat and tusk vendor. Well, this part of the game was set as they traveled north towards the Jotun, who were like a Norse analogue. And they hunted things like narwhals and walruses. And this would be the type of things that they sell. So meat from penguins or narwhal tusks, which could also therefore double up as a spear. So the next thing we're going to have a look at is the actual descriptions we are going to give these items. And I'm going to go through a few examples, but let's first of all look at the Bakewell tart itself. Remember, when creating our descriptions for items, we can keep them short and just include one or two bits of information that round out the lore of our world, and our players' imaginations will do the rest. So, the Bakewell tart. Bakewell tart, created in the Black Horse Inn in the 1820s, this delicious dessert from the town of Bakewell is guaranteed to give you the energy to hike across the beautiful landscape of the Peak District. Counts as one ration. Most societies in the world have created alcohol at one point, and they're usually unique to that culture, the specific alcohol that they drink. So I usually like to add like a wine or alcohol vendor to my setting that gives people a bit of an insight into the world. And I'll just go through a few of these examples for you. My tip here would be is to take existing things that you know and just twist them ever so slightly. These following drinks from the drink vendor come from my web rail campaign. So just to add context, that is floating islands in space linked together by a giant spider web upon which city-sized trains travel. So all of these drinks should have a little bit of flavour in that represents that sort of thing. The first we'll have a look at is the Railside Red. So it reads as such. Railside Red, a popular and relatively cheap house red, notable for its sweet and fruity flavour. The sole purpose of having this here is to create like a baseline drink that is also named flavoured by the world. But we could also have another drink here, Ghost Touched Chardonnay, which shows us that some of these fragments are very different from others. A delicate Chardonnay. The wine is almost exclusively made from grapes that have grown in necromantically infused landscapes. When drinking it, the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. We've also got Abyss Spice Rum. And Abyss Spice Rum, again, is something that takes advantage of the geography of the world, and we infuse it into the drink. The Abyss Spice Rum is aged in a unique fashion. Kegs are lowered off the sides of fragments for years at a time. The process gives the rum an extra kick that's found in no other drink. Driver's Tipple Whiskey is named so because of one of the professions in the game world. A warm and peaty whiskey. One swig is enough to shock senses that make you alert. One bottle is enough to lull you into a dreamless sleep. So you can see why drivers would drink that. And finally, axle grease moonshine. Yes, it is actually made from fermented axle grease. And that creates a drink that, would be drunk in the very poorest of areas and actually takes advantage of the fact they're living on the train themselves. So each of these drinks represent the world and represent the cultures there by adding just dashing in a little bit of flavour. Okay, Now, I hope that was enlightening. I hope that all made sense. And I'll see you next time where we are going to be talking about artifacts. Ta-ra.